So good afternoon, David. How's it going?
All good. Living the dream.
The pandemic situation, we still have lots of hiccups, because in Minsk, we use the Zoom, and then I don't have the personal Zoom account. Maybe that's why I had a little bit of an issue. And yeah, so judges coming, but still Audrey is not here. So because we have 3 presenters today, but I'm not sure about the other lady, So why don't we start now, Or maybe Audrey is here. So sorry for the some technical issue, I should have a double check, but I'm gonna talk to the Michael and then Sarah later. So first of all, thanks for your joining our undergraduate student competition. The student will have about 20 minutes. So let me just bring the. So oral presenter will have maximum 20 minutes. So 15-minute presentation and 5-minute Q&A section. So Michael, could you help us to be as the timekeeper? Whenever they reach to the 3-minute left, you could just say 3 minutes, 1 minute, and then out of time. Can you do that?
Yep. Can you give me those times again?
So it will be a 20-minute max, but for the presentation is 15 minutes. So when they reach to the 12 minutes, which means the 3 minutes left, right? So 3 minutes, 1 minute, and then out of time,
Okay, I got it.
Okay, that is good. So do you guys have any question? We only eat out the 3 minutes, so it should be great, Hopefully all our judges joined this section. So if you don't have a question, then let me introduce first presenter. And then later, I think she will go for her presentation. So the first presenter is the Audrey Hyke. Audrey Hyke is a University of Minnesota graduate with a degree in statistics, minor in mathematics and GIS. She spent a year with the U-Spatial, working as a geospatial consultant on project, including one she focused on in her presentation. She is the most interested in data analysis, design, and visualization, and connecting that to the spatial topic of GIS. She is now a master student at the University of Minnesota in natural resources science and management, working on the research with Bayesian statistics and forest modeling. The topic she will present today is GIS-aided community regenerative design. So Audrey, this is all yours. So can you share your the PowerPoint and you're ready to go.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that.
Yeah,
so
we can see that you're the PowerPoint.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. My name is Audrey Hyke, and I worked in a regenerative design project when I was an undergrad at the University of Minnesota. So today I will be sharing what I learned from using GIS to aid this project. So Design for Community Regeneration, or D4CR, is an initiative led by the Minnesota Design Center at the U. It's a geodesign process that lets community members participate from the ground up, starting with a framework of GIS data, which I created. So the main idea is to show members of the community possibilities of multiple innovative ideas by identifying their assets of land, such as underutilized golf courses, school properties, and industrial sites, and participate in an inclusive decision process about future regenerative land use that yields initiatives ready for implementation. So I had the opportunity to be the GIS consultant, but there are many, many other partners who worked and still work on this project, as shown on screen. So here's a graphic that'll help introduce you all to what I worked on. So I worked in the Discover, Dream, and Decide realms. So Discover recruited all of the community members and partners, gathered GIS data, and created a framework for how best to evaluate different possible initiatives. Dream is where all of the participants came together to brainstorm the ideal scenario for the city to come up with all that could be possible, from instantaneous innovations to ones that would be tens of years in the future. So Decide is where I spent most of my time, where different teams of participants use those potential innovations to come up with their own visions for what works best for the city. So a scorecard-like framework was used to rate how useful each innovation was. A basketball-like bracket was used to come up with one final list of innovations that all of the participants wanted to pursue. So these 3 phases were completed in July of this year, and the do phase has just started. So currently, D4CR is a little over 1 year into their pilot program, and that's for the small northwestern city of Warren, Minnesota. So they have a population of approximately 1,500, and the entire city is within a 1 square mile area. So I was able to meet virtually with members of the city who all had various perspectives of life in Warren. They, along with the partners, were split into 4 point of view, or POV, teams who collaboratively chose what they thought would be the best courses of action, not only for the city of Warren as a whole, but themselves and their peers as well, in 3 negotiation workshops. So a big change from my normal GIS work was that this project didn't include any complex algorithms or analyses. I used ArcGIS templates for all of my work. My focus was to get the data set, was to create a data set and let the stakeholders use it for their input. So this means that no development costs had to be accounted for. So I did do some analysis of the city, including creating like a 1 meter classification of Warren. So I'll get into the details of some of my methods for that soon, but that's not where I focused most of my time and energy. I mostly dealt with the interaction between those who live in Warren, many for their whole lives, and the various partners and project leaders who have never been to Warren or even the Northwest region of Minnesota, and those interactions through GIS. So my first task in this project was to create a map of the town. Being able to get an overview of the city was the first step to connect the bridge of residents and the partners who worked on this pilot program. So over 100 layers of GIS data were worked into this map, fitting into 9 projective system innovation groups from the International Geodesign Collaborative. So you can see that on the right-hand side of the map. So things like water infrastructure, agriculture, industry and commerce, and residential layers were all added together, along with just the basic geography of the area, to complete a picture of the city that we were working on. Most of the work was on how to categorize each layer. I listed most of the layers is on the left for you guys to see. So most questions I had to answer were, is this layer useful? Who's actually using this map, and will they already have prior knowledge about Warren? This map is being used in the introduction to the whole D4CR Warren project. So many different people from different backgrounds were using it, which I had to account for as well. So overall, this created the baseline for how we move forward with what innovations were possible based on the geography and infrastructure already in place. So that 1 meter classification I created was done for use by the Natural Capital Project, or NatCap, from the University of Minnesota Institute of the Environment. It models impacts of different regenerative innovations and was used for scoring measures, which I'll explain later. So I used the ArcGIS classification wizard using a supervised method to make this digitization of the whole city. I first created 5 initial classes: agriculture, bare soil, trees, grass and shrubs, and roads and paved surfaces. So as you can see, I manually added in 3 more classes after the supervised method. Too many classes yielded unreliable results in the initial method, so I utilized vectors that I already had for the map I created to add buildings and hydrography. So I had building vectors from combining LiDAR data, satellite imagery, and OpenStreetMap data. So I used OpenStreetMap as the base and LiDAR to update any errors with where the buildings were. And then the DNR provides vector hydrography layers for the entirety of Minnesota. So I converted all of those vectors into rasters and then added them to the overall digitization for maximum accuracy. So I also compared satellite imagery to the digitization and manually changed classes as needed. NatCap asked for a 5 meter resolution, and I used various resampling methods to get to those 5 meters. So the 2 that were most useful were bilinear resampling and majority resampling, with bilinear being the most accurate and the majority having the least amount of noise. So I wish I had better reference photos because I was very proud of how accurate I was able to get this. Okay, so for the negotiation workshops in the Decide realm, I created a dashboard that users were able to interactively choose innovations to display, along with the corresponding total score for those choices. So think SimCity, but with real world consequences. So the Minnesota Design Center created all of the scoring, with some based by innovation and some based by the area chosen. So as you can see in this possible configuration, the user has chosen innovations such as WAT1D, which corresponds to new river buffers in the northeast section of the city, right here. So all of their choices are shown on the map, with the total score being 660 points out of a total score of 3,081. So not too great, but maybe that's all the user thought was necessary. So each score is also broken down into subcategories, including water, health and happiness, and economic development, which were normalized into a score out of 100. So looking back at the recordings of these workshop sessions, I saw a pattern emerge. It started with us walking through each innovation, going to the map and discussing it while being able to see everything in a spatial context. But as the sessions progressed, switching back to that map became less important. By the end, it became a matter of just going down the list and checking boxes in the spreadsheet. While this very well may be due to some flaws in my design of the dashboard, I think it was because the opinions that we were most interested in hearing were those of the communities. And because they lived there, they already knew where the river was and the best way to cut a trail alongside it. They knew of the landscape of the surrounding area, and they could already visualize a new dairy farm within their head. So they didn't need that map aspect. And then the partners, they were all experts in their respective fields, and they knew the impacts of each innovation, which most of the time didn't rely specifically on where they were within the city. So with community regenerative design, it's important to remember that no matter how complex and accurate any GIS modeling or optimization techniques may be, that cannot be the only thing to base your decisions on. Each POV team created their own unique plan for the town that was far from plans that would have been made from people outside of the region. So residents of the town have shown and proposed new innovations for regeneration that would have never been found without this human facet of geodesign. Initiatives that seemed obvious from an outside perspective, such as a trail alongside the entirety of the river, were immediately shot down by residents as they knew the land and the willingness of the owners to allow a trail. So some main takeaways from this project.
The 3-minute warning there.
All right, thank you. So time and time again, I was going through options for how best to create this GIS-based system to help with the negotiation meetings. And time again, I discussed how easy it would have been in person. A simple map with sticky notes that the residents could write down ideas on, a big whiteboard to brainstorm and workshop different possibilities, and no Zoom room hassles. Is that simply the solution? Being on the ground with those in the community itself? From a logistical getting things done perspective, yes. From a connection perspective though, both yes and no. So the virtual aspect of this project certainly led to more opportunities to connect with the community, as most partners, including myself, were at least 5 hours away from the city of Warren. The online format for the GIS pieces to this project led to more people being able to tinker with them on their own time and then come back to the workshop with new ideas. But nothing can really replace being face-to-face with community members and seeing how different initiatives could be worked into Warren in person. Deciding how to change a town with never being in that town is difficult. So the hard thing about this project is that I don't know the right answers. I didn't come up with a perfect solution. In fact, I think I left with more questions than answers. So what I did fruitless? I don't think so. Was what I did totally worth it? I also don't think so. Weaving together both the human and technical facets of geodesign was challenging but rewarding. I would be interested to work with more geodesign projects in the future and maybe even come up with some answers to all of my questions. Overall, this project was a huge learning experience, not only for me, but for everyone involved. The community of Warren was responsive and excited for their future innovations, and I too am excited to see what will come of this project and projects similar. So right now I'm working on modeling forests, but I would be super interested in applying my GIS and statistical modeling knowledge to help more small communities thrive. So thank you. So I want to say special thanks to the entire Minnesota Design Center team who led the project, as well as Lenny of Spatial.
Okay, so thank you, Audrey. Do you guys have any question about this project, about judges?
Hi, Audrey, I'm David Kelly from the University of St. Thomas. Very, very nice community GIS project. Just a couple of simple questions about this. What classes did you take as an undergraduate to prepare you for this particular project?
That's a really good question. And I would say most of the classes that I took that were applicable were my GIS-based courses. So I was in a remote sensing class where I learned about classification and LiDAR. But really, I was starting from scratch with all of the human interaction elements for a minute.
Right, yeah, I mean, that's an element that broaches many different disciplines from psychology to sociology and beyond just the scope of a GIS project. And anybody else have any questions? I don't want to hog the time.
I have a question. In your presentation, you mentioned that you've used more than 100 layers, data layers in your project. seems you created some of the layers yourself, right? Including the land cover layer. And how did you use the LiDAR data when you creating the land cover layer?
Yeah, so I used it to find where the buildings were. So I used the different points. So I used the ground return points as well as the first return points. And that I was able to spot out all of the building footprints and then convert that into vectors. So I didn't just, sorry, go ahead.
So did you get your LiDAR data from MinGeo?
Yes.
Or MinTopo? Yeah, MinTopo actually has a layer, a building layer already created. So if you download the data from MinTopo, they have the building layer already created. You can use it directly.
Okay, I'll have to use that next time.
Yeah.
Good to
And
know.
so I like the idea of you using the open street map, help you to delineate the roads and other information. That's a good idea. They have very up-to-date information. Okay. And so I have another question: is how can you combine this 100 layers to get a final score for for your study area, the final score of the D4CR? So how did you integrate those 100 layers together?
Yeah, so the layers weren't really part of the total scoring. So I didn't create the scoring, the Minnesota Design Center did, and it was based on each individual innovation. So for example, tree-lined streets corresponded to a score of 30, which if you chose it, that was added to your total score. So my GIS layers were used to get the ideas for the innovations that were then used to get the scoring. So there's no direct line between my layers and the scoring.
I see.
itself.
So you have used more than 100 layers. Most of the layers is used for like a visual, connection, visualization purpose, right? So,
Yep, exactly.
okay, I see.
I think we have plenty of time, so we could take one more question if you have. So sounds like no question to get involved. So Audrey, maybe my question is pretty simple, but so suppose that you have more time. How do you polish your project?
I think I would ask more for more perspectives from the partners and from the community members themselves, because I'm coming into this from a very specific point of view. And I know I'm talking about the GIS layers specifically, but it would be nice to know fully how those GIS layers affected the other people themselves. So that's what I would do.
Okay, sounds good. So thanks for your presentation. So
Thank you.
second presenter is Emily Lockling. So let me just a little bit briefly explain about her bibliography, and then it's all yours. So based on her information, Emily Lockling is a student at Fondue Tribal and Community College, finishing out the final year of her AS in Geographic Information System. She is an intern at Guddal Space Flight Center for fall 2021 and has recently received her AS degree in environmental science from the college. So the topic she presents today is development of collector application for invasive species sampling. So Emily, it's all yours now. So can you unmute first?
Yep, I'm just trying to get into presenting mode.
Take your time.
It's not letting me move my cameras for some reason. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I have a poster rather than a PowerPoint presentation. And I would like to start this saying that the collector application, ArcGIS Collector, is no longer being used, and I believe it's actually set to be shut down this December. So the collector application that they're pushing now is field maps. So this was created back in the spring, so I was not aware of that at the time, or I would have looked into a more, I suppose, I don't know what the word would be, but I would have looked into the current standard of collector applications. So this project came about because our school has a strong relationship with tribal resources. And they have been conducting this ongoing study where they are checking out different areas for invasive species. So in Minnesota, invasive species cause a lot of different ecological and economic harm in 8% of our lakes. And as the land of 10,000 lakes, you can imagine how many hundreds that is added up to. So monitoring the distribution of these invasive species is vital to management and prevention because they impact both terrestrial and aquatic environments, unfortunately. So what they came across is a issue that happens with a lot of surveying campaigns, and that is that between teams and between field seasons, the data does not get collected in exactly the same way or same format. So you end up with gaps, or you end up with data that takes a lot of processing to be able to use. So what we wanted to accomplish with this was to use an existing technology to create kind of a template for their needs for the specific project. So what I did was I went in with an attribute table and I created different fields for each of the things they would need to collect. And this could be specifically the names, scientific and common, as well as different ways that they shorten it down for their tables and for their processing, and as well as the state that a plant has made it to, because this one really focuses on the terrestrial. So this will tell you if there's a plant that is seeding, if it's just a sapling, how many there are in an area, and this really gives an idea of the spread of invasive species. So a big part of this as well was creating a drop-down menu. So there's not multiple different ways to spell an Acer maple or any of these other invasive species, like different kinds of roots. And anyway, so what we did was we created a drop-down menu, and that allows people to go in, and from any point they're at in the field, it will automatically create a location-based point, and it will allow them to select in different areas the type of plant it is, and as well as the different growth states. And this creates just a very accurate and a very sorry, it creates a continuous, goodness, the word has lost me, but it creates the most accuracy because there aren't misspellings, there aren't multiple versions of the same word, it's just a drop-down menu. And I did this using their specifications for invasive species that they know are in the areas that we look into in Minnesota. So after that, we did a couple little tests to make sure that it all works out in the field, and I was able to place different points. And this can all later be exported as an Excel table, and it can be utilized in different products. It can be used to create a different map. And so it's not just stuck in this mobile web format version. Another really important reason for using this collector application is that you can use it on the go. And of course, that's necessary for in the field. But it was also important to us that we made sure you could use it on a cell phone. And that's because with the pandemic, a lot of different tech teams for different government agencies, as well as, campuses, schools, anything like that, they were pretty overworked. So we thought that it would be really useful to have a tool that you could use on your personal device if you needed to, and if there weren't tablets available from work. And that kind of created an accessibility that otherwise could have been lost. So in conclusion, further developments on this would definitely be changing the format to the new standard with field maps, as well as to look through the other surveys, because they don't just have terrestrial. There's also aquatic and different forms that go with those. They also have emerald ash borer, which, as you may know, is a really big problem right now in Minnesota. It's been spread through the movement of firewood. And using the same exact process to create all the different survey maps will maximize efficiency across all of the outstanding projects with Fond du Lac Resource Management. So I would like to thank my professor, Dr. Carl Sack, and Kelsey Taylor with Fond du Lac Natural Resources, because they will help me a lot with this project. And that is all I have for you today.
Okay, thank you, Emily. So we'll take the question.
It is hard to see the poster, from my screen. I don't know if anybody else have the problem, but it seems she has a lot of information in the poster. So, but it's very hard to see, though, it's very small, the fonts. So I have a related question. So you've used the data collector, right, in ArcGIS Online. Also, some students also, they use the survey 123 when they do the data collection. Have you used the survey 123?
I have not.
Okay, so that one can also be very helpful for you to collect, data in a form, so you can collect a variety of data set. So, and that can also be used in the mobile devices. So maybe think about, in the future, how can you, combine this survey 123 and your field collector together. So.
I just have one comment. It's been a while since I used a collector app, but I seem to remember that if you have a Wi-Fi connection in ArcGIS Online institutional account, you can have this data go directly back to a collection point that you can set up ahead of time, a map or a database, and you don't need to export it as a CSV file after the user comes back from the field. It's much more dynamic than that.
Yes.
Is this true? Or is my memory foggy?
I believe you're right. So what you do is you create your map for collection. You do create that in a web map online, and then all the data does get saved into that. But you can also export all the individual points, I believe, in their data.
Yeah, after they create the web application, they share the link, to the users. So they can open that web application if they have the mobile device with the internet. So once they open that web application, they will be able to, add, collect the data and put the data on the web app.
Right. So that would be a seamless way and no data loss for the manager, but you would need some type of institutional ArcGIS Online account, so a free public account wouldn't do it. Does Fond du Lac have that, either the tribe or your community college institutional account that could host that? Otherwise, you're gonna have to pay for it.
Yeah, I believe every school has that. So
Yes, so both the tribe has one and the school has one.
mhm.
Yeah, well, that would be good for perpetuity of this project going forward, because you're gonna graduate, move on, but the data doesn't have to,
Yes.
data collection doesn't have to stop.
Yes, so what they did was they did create me an account through the tribe, so I was able to create it in there, and then that account I believe will exist on.
Good, yeah. Again, community GIS, that's awesome.
Emily, thanks for your presentation. Did you have a chance to have anybody try out the app and do data collection? And have you gotten any feedback on how it's working for people out there actually doing the data collection in the field?
Yeah, so I haven't heard back from their team yet. I believe that the person I was in contact with there went on maternity leave at the end of this project, so I would have to check back with her and see if they were able to use it this field season. But I was able to try it from my own phone with my sister, and we did have some fun getting to scroll through the selections.
Thank you. And did you find it easy to use? Were you on a smartphone device? And
Yep.
is it a long list of Latin names of species? Is it hard to navigate through?
Yeah, so it was pretty long. There was quite a few. I want to say there was something around 70. Something that I wish that they would put in these features is an auto-populate. So when you scroll through and you find an invasive species, I wish they had an auto-populate that would tell you that's the fourth one you've come across. But instead, you kind of have to do a little bit of memorization, and you have to put that in the point name yourself. So that's kind of my criticism. I wish there was an auto-populate feature.
And then just one more question with the data collection. Do you allow them to take a photo of what they're capturing?
Yes, so I do believe that's in the application that you can add your own notes and you can add a photograph. I want to say I added a photo uploading spot. If I didn't, it's very easy to add right from the web map or the web application online.
Thank you. Very cool.
Thanks for the question. Any other question? Okay, then Emily, because I'm teaching the field mapping with GPS at the Minnesota State. So my question is that, what was the accuracy in your data collection?
The accuracy?
Yeah.
So I believe it's as accurate as the user wants it to be, just because this was created with the attribute table from their resource management. So as long as there isn't any operator error in identifying, I do believe it would be very accurate. And from what I noticed, even with a weak connection, the location data point was correct as well.
Okay. So maybe, like a ballpark, it's like a 2 meter accuracy or 4 meter accuracy. Have you ever had that kind of?
I am not sure. I didn't look into that very closely, but it did seem very accurate.
Yeah. Smartphone, I think the phone GPS is not as accurate as the Trimble GPS unit.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
If we connect to the R1 or R2 receiver, because even though like a smartphone data collection, we could have up to maybe sub-meter accuracy too. And then maybe, as you know, the functionality in Azure Collector will be replaced by the ArcGIS field map some days. So it's kind of all-in-one application, but Azure Collector is pretty popular to get the collector there. Okay, so that's a good question, a good presentation. So our last presenter, but not the least, Tommy Guddal. So let me introduce him briefly. Let me see the information. Tommy Guddal, is it correct to pronounce it your last name?
It's Guddal, just
Yeah,
like
Guddal.
Guddal. Yep.
Okay, Guddal. Okay, Guddal is entering his fourth and a final year at the University of St. Thomas. He will graduate with a major in geography and GIS, and with a minors in economics and sustainability. Born and raised in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, Tommy has always had an immense passion and love for his home, the Twin Cities. As a result, Tommy's interest within geography is in urban geography, and the integrated process at play in the functioning of a well-designed and sustainable city. He looked forward to working as a teaching assistant for St. Thomas in the fall for an introductory geography course and an environmental study course. After graduate, Tommy hopes to work in either the public or private sector to gain greater GIS experience and eventually and possibly attend the graduate school with a focus on urban planning. So his topic today is vulnerability and mortality, accessing spatial variation in COVID-19 related mortality rate during the onset of the pandemic in the United States. So Tom, it's all yours now.
Alrighty, I'll just go ahead and share my screen.
Take your time.
All right, so I I decided to present using a story map. So I'll just go ahead and scroll through. So yeah, as you were saying, the title is the title is Vulnerability and Mortality. I'll be assessing spatial variation in COVID-19 related mortality rates during the onset of the pandemic in the United States. So just a quick overview. I'll introduce the problem of COVID-19. I'll talk about what does social vulnerability mean and what is that. I'll justify the factors that went into the model of vulnerability. I'll get into my research question, and then I'll show you the full model that went into our vulnerability index, and then I'll show the maps of individual factors. Then I'll compare our vulnerability index model with death counts per 100,000 people. Then I performed a scatter plot analysis, as well as, which was pretty inconclusive, which I'll get into, but then I also analyzed the outliers, which can kind of lead as a stepping stone into what future research might be. So just to introduce, I'm sure COVID, the pandemic needs little introduction at this point. It's been an event of the magnitude unlike any in modern history. And with that, the US was not unaffected at the time of the study, which was about a year ago now. The US was actually leading the world in both total cases as well as total death counts. But one thing that was very clear with COVID-19 is that it impacted different communities to varying degrees. And there are a lot of factors that affect a population's vulnerability. And the importance in this is trying to understand this so that we can have effective resource distribution and implement effective and good preventative measures. So what is social vulnerability? The basis of this was I used the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, which they define social vulnerability as the degree to which a community can prevent human suffering and or financial loss during a hazardous event, such as a pandemic. So our goal in the study was to select and weigh certain key variables based on what the academic literature was telling us at the time, that would affect one's vulnerability to COVID-19 specifically. So I chose five 5 factors in the model, and the first being age. So age impacts the COVID-19 health outcomes. Younger members of the population tend to have shown in large part to fare much better when contracting COVID-19. They are less likely to die from the disease or need to be hospitalized, while older members of the population account for a greater disproportionate number of COVID-19 associated deaths. One reason for this is that older members of the population tend to have pre-existing health conditions. That could be anything from asthma, obesity, diabetes, or being immunocompromised. So yeah, that was the first factor. The next one was income. So there have been a lot of places reporting cases and death counts at the time were showing big disparities in health outcomes between rich and poor. So one reason for this is poor individuals make up a larger percentage of essential workers. So they were the ones that did not have the privilege to work from home or to take time off because they needed to work out of necessity. Another aspect that we were trying to get at with this was lower income families tend to live in more crowded living quarters, which might need to rely on public transportation. All of that just adding to greater exposure. Then there's also the issue of lack of adequate access to healthcare. Then next variable was racial disparities. Many places reporting data were showing that Black, Latino, and Native American populations specifically had disproportionate amounts of both cases and deaths across the country. One aspect is minority groups make up a greater percentage of essential workers again, and then they're also less likely to be covered by health insurance. So a lot of the same reasons as the income one. And then the next one was single parent households. So I chose this based on what the literature was telling me. COVID-19 had a big burden on parents with young children. There were closures of schools and childcare centers. But the parents, to provide for their children still needed to go to work. And so there's that greater chance of contracting the disease. And there's also a financial burden that the pandemic put on them, which also could impact access to care as well. And then my last one was population density. And how I got at this was I used the variable of multiple unit housing. So it's clear that larger cities like New York City were early epicenters for COVID-19. Preventative measures were not as well understood, especially early on in the pandemic. Like if you remember when they told us not to wear masks for a while. So as a result, COVID-19 was transmitted a lot in highly densely populated places. And then simply, COVID-19 is spread through people. So denser places will have more transmission. And multiple unit housing was the indicator for population density. So for our research question, so based on the research and academic literature available, the model aims to identify populations in the US with the greatest vulnerability to COVID-19. So we used county level demographic data provided by the CDC, and the model was based on 5 standardized variables. So here are the selected variables I just went over. And so each data set, what we did from there to build the model was we put them into a feature to raster tool so that we could create a layer of it and make a map. Then we put those 5 subsequent layers into a weighted sum tool to create a vulnerability index layer, like a composite of all of them, all the factors based on our selected variables. And then each factor is given a weight, and I base these based on the importance from the literature that was available at the time. So those are the weights. That's what I chose to go with. And then from there, the vulnerability index layer, we compared it with data from Johns Hopkins University that contained number of deaths per 100,000 people. And then we did a scatter plot analysis of the two. And then I also looked at the outliers where vulnerability was over and underestimated to kind of indicate potential areas to refine the model. So this is the layout of the model that went into our vulnerability index layer. So as I was saying, put them all in the feature to raster to get individual layers, and then into the weighted sum tool to create the final one. Then each one was standardized between 0 and 1, where 0 indicates least vulnerable and 1 indicates most vulnerable. So I'll just briefly scroll through the maps of the 5 different variables. So here's standardized per capita income. And then next is percent minority. And then percent over 65. Percent living in a single parent household. And then percent living in multiple unit housing. And then all of those together through the weighted sum tool, we got this vulnerability index layer. And where the lighter colors are least vulnerable, where the darker colors are most vulnerable. So the way that we joined the vulnerability index layer with the Johns Hopkins University data on deaths was we used the tool zonal statistics as table, and that combined both data sets into one table so that we can do a scatter plot analysis of them. And so they were connected using and identified using the Federal Information Processing Standard county codes, or the FIPS codes. And so here's an image of the full model that went into this project. And then here is a side-by-side. I'll just go from back to forth. So here is our vulnerability index map. Then here is the map of deaths per 100,000 people. As you can see, looks like we captured some things, but not everything by no means. And I'll explain why I think that is. Here's just the metadata for it. And here's the scatter plot. So as you can see, we only have an R value of 0.02. So hardly any relationship, if at all, which was disappointing. But you can also gain some insight, especially with what is, it's clear that there are some very notable outliers within the data set. And so what we did was we selected the places with the most deaths and the places with the least deaths, and tried to see if we could draw any conclusions from there. So here is just the map of the selected counties. Oh, sorry. There's the scatter plot of the selected counties. And then here is just the map of where those counties are located. So these are the counties that experience the most deaths per 100,000 people. And then here is places with the least amount of deaths, where there was zero, or the least, if any, number of deaths at the time. And so here is the distribution of where those are in the United States. And so the results of the scatter plot analysis for the places with the most amount of deaths were sort of overestimated vulnerability. These seem to be concentrated in major cities along the East Coast, as well as areas in the rural South. The reason why it's in major cities kind of gets at the importance of population density. But this is also kind of contradicted because not all major metropolitan areas were hit, mostly only ones like New York, which was an early epicenter for the disease. And then there's also areas highlighted in the rural South and along US-Mexico border, which indicate disproportionate impact on Black and Latino populations. And then also supporting that that race plays a factor is that a lot of reservation lands in states such as Arizona, New Mexico, and South Dakota were also highlighted. So it seems that at least we got the race correct, that that is an important factor in modeling vulnerability to COVID-19. Then as far as the underestimated areas, seems to be a lot of concentrations in rural Appalachia and then rural areas of the Midwest and mountain regions, which also kind of supports the importance of population density in COVID-19 transmission. These are just more rural places, less exposure, less interaction between lots of people in big settings. And these areas also, based on the literature, tell me that these areas tend to be predominantly white populations, also supporting evidence that race is a major factor in vulnerability to COVID-19. And so just these kind of insights of just looking, while we didn't have a good correlation initially, there's a lot of insights that can be made that can apply to future refined models. So then just
there, Tom.
All right, and then just some brief conclusions. So it's clear that quantifying these differences in vulnerability proves to be a challenge, but further adjustments can be made and must be considered. You can potentially change the weights of variables, include new variables in the model. One important one seems to be race, but another one was population density, which I had weighted pretty low, so I might want to bump that one up. But other potential variables could be like healthcare coverage, hospital capacity, or distance from a hospital. It's also important to recognize that during the onset of the pandemic, there was a lot of varying methods in logging and processing data, and that can add greater variability. So it's the focus in the future should be gaining more robust data and fine-tuning the model. And one interesting aspect could be potential comparison with data from today that could lead to insight on development of the pandemic. And the reason these are so crucial is that it is crucial for setting up effective and equitable resource distribution. And then here's just some list of sources.
Okay, thank you, Tommy. It was a good presentation. So we'll take the question.
Tommy, you mentioned the additional variables. How about the gender? Is that an important variable? Do you think that's an important variable?
Gender, you said?
Yeah.
It very well could be. I didn't see any evidence when I was doing research for the project of any, at least early on, any differences or disparities between different gender groups, but it very possibly could, and that'd be something to look into as a possible new factor if there was evidence for that.
Yeah. So you did the project by yourself, right? You mentioned several times is that just a habit, right?
I guess that is kind of a habit. Yeah, it was. Yeah. So I did make this project in the context of a class. So I guess maybe that's why I say we, because we were all kind of coming up with our own models, but with our own variations on things. But it was largely led by my professor and advisor, Dr. Paul Laura. He was a big. His guidance kind of led through this presentation. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Tommy. What class was it? I'm curious.
The class was, so I took it last fall, and the class was titled Geography of Global Health. So, we were looking at kind of just mapping and looking at different things, like we talked about John Snow and cholera and things like that. But then the majority of the class was spent on COVID-19, as that was obviously the very relevant global health issue at the time. So like beyond this project, we also looked at like friction to distance of COVID-19, how easily COVID-19 can spread in certain places versus others based on, geography, people, roads, things like that. So yeah.
Yep. Cool. Very cool. I think you said it, but if you can remind me, the data for the vulnerabilities, that was based on census data?
Yes, it was based on, so the CDC has they call it their social vulnerability index. And I kind of use that same term. And yeah, that's based on, they have 15 factors across 4 different themes. There's social, economic, spatial, things like that. And yeah, and I believe it's based on census data since it's from the CDC, but yeah.
The data is directly from CDC then, okay.
Yes.
And then,
correct.
and then the Johns Hopkins data, what time frame is that data from? Is it just a time slice, or was it cumulative to a certain point in the pandemic?
Well, it was, so the reason why we used the Johns Hopkins University data is that they were updating death counts very frequently.
Mhm.
And the time that we made this was, we were probably working on this presentation about October of 2020. So it had about 6 or 7 months. And that is the cumulative number of deaths throughout that time per 100,000 people.
Yep. So through October last year, what
Yep.
do you think vaccine rates and differences? How do you think that would affect the results as well? Now that we're a year past it.
Yeah, that would definitely have an impact. That would be a good kind of a good future area of study. I would say that you know, if there's populations or like if there's differences in populations between you know, getting the vaccine versus not, I think that, you know, the populations that do get the vaccine would likely fare better. But yeah, that'd be an interesting study to look at.
Yeah, that would be fun. And then just one technical suggestion on your swipe map.
Yes.
I found it interesting that you use the same or similar color ramps on both sides.
They are the same color ramp. Yes.
Would it be maybe more effective to use different color ramp on one side?
Yeah.
See the differences between the variables.
Yeah, no, definitely. It does get, especially just with the little caption. You're definitely right. It can get a little confusing. That would probably help if it was maybe different color ramps or just different symbology. That would probably help. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just have one question. I just have to say in transparency, I was not, although I'm at St. Thomas, I was not at all involved with this project. Tommy, I was just curious, you mentioned that you had weighted factors.
Yes.
Which one did you weight the highest in the vulnerability calculation?
I weighted the per capita income and percent minority the highest. If I were to do this over again, I would probably change these weights a little bit. I would kind of give multiple unit housing a little more say, maybe not give income as much a say, but as I chose these specific weights based on what my research had led me kind of to believe, in income and differences among racial groups were a lot of what the literature was talking about at the time. And so, yeah, I would probably change these if I were to go over this again and probably even add variables, but just to refine it. But yeah, I went off the literature for that one.
Okay, reasonable. Okay, thank you.
Any other question or suggestion?
Yeah, I'd like him use the story map to present, you know, this project. So in the story map, for the maps, you can also add those, you know, detailed legend, so we can see the, you know, better information if you add the legends.
Then Tommy, like
So this one has one, but yeah,
that is good. I mean,
yeah, that one has. Yeah.
Tommy, have you ever considered to run the regression model or GWR to find out the relationship, you know?
Yeah, that would, sorry, you said run a regression model?
Yeah, so like, you know, we know that, you know, like elderly people are susceptible to the mortality, you know, in the, so you could find out some like a positive, negative relationship between them first. After that, you could set up your vulnerability index. So in my case, you need to give more weight to the elderly people instead of income or gender, or maybe different types of job too. So, but I think it was very interesting. I could see like some like a pattern near to the coast area,
Yeah.
I don't know why, like we have many value for that one. And then it was kind of interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I think Professor Jian, he recently published the article similar to this topic. So maybe you can share the link to him.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do we have any last question? We still have enough time, but okay. So thanks, Tommy.
Yeah.
Really, like thanks for the all like present today was very excellent. And thanks for you're joining our undergraduate competition. We still have a second, the section for the undergraduate student competition tomorrow, 1:30 to 3 p.m. I hope like you guys can join. And then I hope like I could fix the like a technical problem to join this one as the host too. So thanks again, and then enjoy rest of the day, and hopefully see you tomorrow. Okay, bye now. And then Michael, can I talk to you?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So.
Well done, Wu. Thanks for.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. You are the my lifesaver today.
No, not it.
No, actually, I need to double check. Because as I said to the Sarah, because Minsk, because our the university has the the Zoom license. So instead of having personal, the account, we do have a school's email account to log into that one, and then in that case, I could, hold up to 500 or 1,000, the audience, So I need to. So how did you, join this meeting?
I did what you did. I followed my calendar link, and then I actually had a